Freeze this frame in your head for a second. A woman stands in a driveway, 7 months pregnant, watching her father's car pull away without her. She just spent 6 seasons being the most pitied character on television. The eviction, the garage, the milk stains on live TV. You cried for her. I cried for her. And then the spinoff starts, and within 18 episodes, that same woman is hiding $12,000 of secret debt from a 19-year-old husband who's working 2 jobs to keep her fed. So here's the question that's going to bother you for the rest of this video. What if the show never actually changed her? What if it just finally stopped hiding what she always was? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to watch every single one of her sympathetic scenes completely differently. And there's one moment near the end, involving her own mother, a secret baptism, and a business deal that I promise you missed the first time. Let's get into it. Let's start with the thing everybody already knows, but nobody wants to sit with. Episode 3 of the spinoff. Georgie stumbles onto a stack of credit card statements. 4 cards. Over $10,000 combined. And this isn't impulse spending on shoes or vacations. Some of it traces back to covering medical bills for an ex-boyfriend she hadn't mentioned in over a year. Now, here's the part that actually matters. Not the number itself, but what happens in the 60 seconds after Georgie asks about it. He doesn't yell. He doesn't accuse. He just asks like a husband is allowed to ask his wife about money they supposedly share. And Mandy's first move isn't an apology. It's a redirect. She turns it into a conversation about his insecurity, about how he only got serious with her because she seemed like an upgrade. In the space of one scene, the person hiding the debt becomes the victim of the conversation, and the person who found out becomes the villain for asking. There's a term financial counselors actually use for this pattern of hidden accounts and shifted blame: financial infidelity. It's not a joke term. It shows up in real divorce filings. And what should stop you cold is that the show places this in episode 3 before any of the toxic Mandy discourse online had even started. The writers planted this early, on purpose, before you had time to build a defense for her. And here's the detail that turns this from bad with money into something colder. It wasn't a one-time slip. She kept the cards open, kept making minimum payments, kept the statements away from the mail Georgie would see. That's not a moment of poor judgment. That's ongoing maintenance. Somebody has to actively manage a secret like that for years, choosing which mail to intercept, which conversations to steer away from, which version of the truth to keep repeating until it starts to feel true. That takes more effort than just telling the truth would have, which tells you the debt was never really the issue. The issue is that honesty for Mandy has always felt more dangerous than deception. Now hold that thought, because 15 episodes later, something happens that only makes sense once you connect it back to this scene. Mandy finally lands her first big paycheck from television work, a real one. And what does she do with it? Not rent, not the family's mounting bills. She books herself a spa day. Meanwhile, the family is living under her parents' roof, eating food they didn't buy, and her husband is running on 3 hours of sleep because he added a night shift towing cars just to cover the gap she never told him about. When her own father calls this out at dinner, one person jumps to defend her, not her husband, her mother. Which brings us to the real engine of this whole story. Here's my read on this show, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mandy isn't fighting her mother. Mandy is her mother. She just doesn't know it yet. Think about her whole backstory for a second. She didn't drift away from Audrey by accident. She engineered distance on purpose: a different city, a different social circle, older men who were nothing like anyone Audrey would approve of, a career that put states between them. Every choice she made as a young woman was built as the opposite of her mother's life. But here's the trap almost nobody talks about. When your entire identity is built in opposition to one person, you're not actually free of them. You're orbiting them. Every decision still runs through the filter of what would Audrey do, even if the answer is the opposite of that. You never stop being defined by her. You just flip the sign from positive to negative. There's an actual psychological concept for what happens next, and it's more common than people think. It's called identification with the aggressor. A kid grows up under someone controlling, someone they can't out-argue and can't escape, and eventually the brain finds a workaround. If you can't beat the person in charge, you become the person in charge. It's not conscious. It's not cruelty for its own sake. It's a survival strategy that outlives the situation that created it. Now go back through the show with that lens on. Audrey makes major decisions without consulting Jim. Mandy pushes through a courthouse wedding without factoring in what either family wants. Audrey routinely undercuts Jim's intelligence in front of other people. Mandy calls Georgie a dropout who isn't good enough for her degree. Audrey is cagey and secretive about money. Mandy hides $10,000 in debt. Audrey quietly took over decisions that should have involved her son Connor. Mandy moves into the Cooper house after the tornado and takes over a bedroom that isn't hers to claim. Audrey secretly has her granddaughter baptized Catholic without asking the parents. Mandy secretly starts working with her ex again without telling her husband a thing. Same pattern, different decade, different house. And it's worth pausing on how precise this mirroring actually is, because it's not just thematic, it's structural. Every single one of these pairs involves the same core move, quietly taking control of something that technically belongs to someone else, and then framing that takeover as an act of care rather than an act of control. Audrey didn't tell Jim she thought he was less capable. She just started making the calls for him, so he wouldn't have to worry. Mandy doesn't tell Georgie she thinks his opinion doesn't matter on the wedding, the house, or the money. She just decides and explains it afterward as sparing him the stress. That's the tell. Genuine partnership involves friction because two people negotiating something real will disagree sometimes. What Mandy and Audrey both do instead is remove the negotiation entirely and replace it with a decision already made, dressed up as generosity. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Mandy doesn't see any of it. To her, none of this looks like control. It looks like protecting the family. It looks like independence. It looks like keeping Georgie from stressing about things he doesn't need to worry about. There's a name for that blind spot too. When the exact behavior you swore you'd never repeat feels completely justified once it's coming out of your own mouth. You don't recognize your reflection because you're not looking for your mother's face. You're looking for your own. So when the divorce eventually happens, and by the timeline of the original series, we already know it does, it isn't a twist. It's arithmetic. A woman who spent her whole life running from becoming her mother married a boy, quietly rebuilt her mother's marriage inside her own home, and never noticed she was standing in the exact same kitchen. But there's an earlier scene, the very first one, actually, that reframes everything I just said. And once you look at it honestly, it gets uncomfortable fast. Everyone knows the laundromat story. He tells her he's 21. He's actually 17. She tells him she's 25. She's actually 29. Both of them lied. When the truth surfaces, Mandy throws him out, furious, and the show frames her correctly on paper as the deceived party. But try this exercise. Swap the genders and the ages. A 30-year-old man meets a 17-year-old girl at a laundromat. She tells him she's 21. They sleep together, no protection used. She gets pregnant. When the truth comes out, he throws her out of his apartment, furious that she lied about her age. You already know how that story gets told. Nobody frames that man as an innocent, deceived victim. The age gap and the missing protection would be the headline, not her lie. It would be called exactly what it is. Mandy is a college-educated 30-year-old adult with real dating experience. She's not a naive teenager caught off guard. And yet, across the entire run of the show, she never once turns that question back on herself. Never once asks why a 30-year-old woman slept with someone she'd just met, without any precaution, regardless of what he told her about his age. That question simply doesn't exist for her. Instead, her status as the one who was lied to becomes a permanent trump card. Upset that she hid the debt, he lied about his age first. Frustrated she's secretly working with her ex, he lied about his age first. It stops functioning like a wound and starts functioning like a weapon, one she can reach for in any argument, regardless of what the argument is actually about. And once you notice that, you start to notice something bigger about the whole design of this show. Here's the part I think is genuinely clever writing, whether or not it was fully intentional. Before the spinoff ever put Mandy in a position to do something unlikable, the original series spent years making her the most pitiable character in the room. The apartment padlock. Cold food eaten alone in a dusty garage. The lactation moment on live television at the worst possible time. Her own father driving away from a pregnant daughter standing in the driveway. None of that is filler. Every one of those images is a classic visual shorthand for this person has hit bottom, and it's not their fault. It's the exact grammar filmmakers use to guarantee sympathy before a character does anything questionable. Ask yourself why a comedy would spend that much screen time systematically stripping one character of her home, her job, her body, her dignity, episode after episode, season after season, if she's just there for laughs. Here's my theory, and I think it holds up. The writers were banking sympathy in advance. They knew that in the spin-off, Mandy was going to do things that, on their own, would make an audience turn on her fast. Hiding money, undermining her husband in front of his own family, secretly rekindling contact with an ex. So before any of that landed, they made sure viewers had years of stored up goodwill to spend on excusing it. When she acts exactly like her mother later, something in the back of your head says she's been through so much, and you extend credit she hasn't actually earned in this relationship. That's not lazy writing, that's calculated. And it explains exactly why online debates about Mandy split so hard down the middle. Some viewers watching through the lens of everything she survived, others watching what she's actually doing in the room right now. The show isn't confused about her. It's deliberately making its audience argue with each other. And if you think the money and the mother-daughter mirror are the whole story, wait until you see what happens to the family business. Season 1's finale quietly contains what might be the most brutal storyline in the entire spinoff, and it barely gets discussed. The family decides to sell the tire shop, the same business Georgie poured himself into. He redesigned the sales system. He put in the hours that turned the place around. His widowed mother mortgaged her own house to loan him $500,000 to help make it work. He did everything short of putting his name on the deed. And the buyer they choose? An old flame of Audrey's from years back. So while Audrey is steering the sale of a family business toward a man from her own past, That same family turns to Georgie, the person who arguably saved the store, and tells him flatly that he's not a McAlister. That no matter how much money he brought in, no matter how much work he put in, the decision isn't his to make. And in the moment where a husband needs his wife to stand beside him against her own family, Mandy doesn't. She stays quiet. She sides with the family system she claims to resent. Around the same stretch of episodes, it comes out that she's been secretly back in contact with her ex, working with him, without mentioning it to Georgie at all. And when she's caught, she doesn't apologize with words. She buys him an expensive pair of boots. No conversation, no accountability. Just a gift meant to close the subject. That's not a coincidence. That's the exact move her mother has used on her father for years. Skip the apology, settle the account. Watch what that does to the next generation sitting at that dinner table. Georgie is slowly turning into a version of his own father, soft spoken, exhausted, hiding every real emotion behind a joke because anything else feels too dangerous to say out loud. Mandy is turning into Audrey in real time, and their toddler daughter is growing up inside that exact system, absorbing it as what normal looks like. That's how these patterns actually travel through a family, not through anything in the blood, but through what a child watches get modeled as love over and over until it feels like the only shape love is allowed to take. There's one more scene that puts a stamp on all of this, and it's easy to miss because it plays for less than 2 minutes. Georgie shows up at the emergency room convinced he's having a heart attack, not long after actually losing his father to one. The diagnosis comes back: panic attack, pure accumulated stress. And what does a 19-year-old kid who just had a full physiological breakdown from two jobs, a newborn, grief, and a mother in law chipping away at him daily, do with that information? He brushes it off as nothing. He goes home and apologizes to Mandy for making a scene. The next day, he apologizes to Audrey too, the same woman actively making his life harder. That's not a throwaway beat. That's the entire thesis of the show, delivered in one quiet hospital scene. The person absorbing all the damage has been trained to say sorry for it. And it's worth naming what makes this different from a typical sitcom marriage plot, because that's usually where these shows lose the thread. Most family comedies treat conflict as something that resets by the next episode. A fight happens, a lesson gets learned, everyone hugs it out by the credits. This show doesn't reset anything. The debt from episode 3 is still unresolved in episode 18. The business betrayal doesn't get undone. The panic attack doesn't teach Georgie to stop minimizing himself. If anything, it teaches him to do it better, faster, with less resistance next time. Nothing here behaves like a sitcom problem. It behaves like an actual marriage under actual strain, which is exactly why so many viewers report feeling uneasy, laughing along with the jokes. The comedy is doing its job, but underneath it, the writers are quietly building a case file. So let's go back to that driveway. The pregnant woman watching her father's car disappear. If you only watch that scene once, it's tragedy. Clean, simple, unfair. But if you followed everything that happens after it, the hidden debt, the spa day, the secret contact with an ex, the silence during the business sale, the boots instead of an apology, that same scene stops being simple. It becomes the origin point of a woman who learned, very young, that being wronged gives you permission to wrong other people later, as long as you can point back to the moment it started. Nobody in this story was born this way. Audrey built Mandy, and right now in real time, on screen, Mandy is quietly building the exact same thing in her own daughter. That's the real reason this divorce, when it finally happens in the timeline, was never a twist. It was the ending this story was always walking toward, one small unspoken debt at a time. If this changed how you see a scene you thought you already understood, that's exactly the kind of rewatch this channel is built for. Stick around. There's a lot more hiding in plain sight in this family than the laugh track wants you to notice.